Hi, everybody, and happy Monday. This is Live Weather Impact Plus right here on WCNC Plus. I don't even know what the name of the show is, honestly, because I only fill in here occasionally when Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich is off, but I know it's live, I know it's weather, and I know it's weather impact. So today was the hottest day of the year so far. That was essentially the third day in a row I've said that, because yesterday we hit 95, the day before we hit 92. Well, today 98 was the official high temperature. And normally a high of 98, or that feels like temperature 102 if not higher, is the threshold that our team uses when we talk about extreme heat. So I've said this multiple times on air. Hopefully it has not annoyed anybody at this point, but please, please, please remember that, one, just because you aren't impacted by the heat does not mean that your neighbor is not. Two, the feels like temperature, or the heat index, is a scientific calculation based on your body's response to the combination of the heat and humidity. So it's not a random number that your local meteorologist is just throwing out because they're just trying to be dramatic. It is scientifically based on what the dew point and the temperature are. And third of all, please do not come at me. I know that it is hot and humid this time of year, but this is above average heat and humidity. It's a little bit more prolonged than we normally see. And at the end of the day, our job as meteorologists is to help keep you safe and to keep you weather alert, weather aware. And that's what we are here to do. So with that being said, let's talk about the local forecasts, right? So today, again, the hottest day of the year so far, 98 was the official high temperature. I do think there's a chance that over the last hour or so, we could have briefly touched 99, but we'll have to wait to see when the official second round of data comes in from the National Weather Service. But Lake Norman, probably a fantastic day to be today, because there was sunshine, there were clouds mixing in, and I would say it's a nice day to probably cool off in the water, maybe get that nice breeze that you get when you're on a boat, because that is certainly somewhere where I would love to be right now, especially growing up, going out to the lake out there near Atlanta. Temperatures right now, or at least feels like temperatures, the current heat index still sits at 98 in Charlotte, 101 down in Rock Hill. We have Monroe, Gastonia coming in at 100, 101 as well in Lincolnton, 101 as well in Albemarle, 100 Rockingham, 102 in Cheraw. Now, something I do want to point out about this map is that Raleigh and Fayetteville coming in at 105 plus. They were still technically are under a heat advisory for today, which the normal threshold is 105 if not higher. If you know anything about the Carolinas, you know that both Columbia and Fayetteville kind of get a rep for being extremely hot because of where they are, right? They're far enough inland that they get that influence from the southwesterly wind when high pressure is overhead, like the pattern we have today. Plus, on top of it, where they're not nearly close enough to the coast to get really a big impact from the sea breeze. So oftentimes they are a little bit hotter than we are just based on where they are. But again, it depends on the pattern at that current time. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because those areas, not only east of us, but all the way close to the coast, will actually be even hotter and more humid than us here in Charlotte, believe it or not, over the next few days. So let's talk heat index for tomorrow. So tomorrow and Wednesday especially are going to be the two hottest days. I know you might have heard that kind of teeter-totter back and forth the past few days, but it was always expected to be Monday through Friday where we had 100, if not higher. But as we've gotten closer and closer, which again, this is the job of forecasting, right? Pattern and trend recognition, we've fine-tuned that Tuesday and Wednesday will be those two specific days that we especially want you to stay weather aware, because they are the 2 days that we are expected to be the hottest. So the air temperature tomorrow will near 100 degrees, but heat index 105 all the way up to 107. Now, again, this is specific data for Charlotte. If you're in more rural communities, again, just as I mentioned, east and southeast toward, again, Raleigh and Fayetteville, there's a chance you're even hotter than this. So please, tomorrow and Wednesday especially are the days where we want you to take extra precautions, try to utilize air conditioning as much as possible, drink plenty of water, stay hydrated, all of those things that we talk about, again, this time of year. Now, with that being said, I did want to mention, of course, that while we are under a heat advisory tomorrow and Wednesday, the Raleigh area, Fayetteville, the spots I just showed you, they were under heat advisory today. But tomorrow, you better believe they're going to be even hotter than us, which means they are under an extreme heat warning. If you remember last week, Jeb and I were together, we were actually talking about the heat-related or the heat National Weather Service alerts that were changing. Well, these are the results of those. So remember, extreme heat watch and extreme heat warning were previously called excessive heat watch and warning. I know that sounds like semantics, and truthfully it is, but National Weather Service still working through their hazard mitigation simplification project, and that essentially is easier ways for people to understand things. So excessive heat just sounds crazy, and they changed their wind chill warnings and things like that back in the wintertime to extreme cold, now it's extreme heat, right? Yes, it's a name change, but easier to understand. The threshold, though, remains the same. Extreme heat warnings, at least for this area in the Carolinas, are for a heat index at 110, if not higher. One thing I will say again as we look at the heat index values, and we're of course going to talk more about that coming up, but I just want people to remember that just like the air temperature, the heat index value is also taken in the shade. It's the temperature and the dew point at that current time. So that means that if you're in the direct sunlight, especially for multiple hours, there's a chance that it's actually feeling even hotter than that number on the thermometer. Again, just like when you go to a Panthers game, in the fall and it's 55 degrees outside, and we remind you that in the direct sun that can feel anywhere from 65 to 75. It's the same impact, unfortunately, during the summertime here in the Carolinas. And notice that it's not just us here in the Carolinas. I mean, we have Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, parts of Arkansas, expanding all the way into the Ohio River Valley that are under heat advisories and then extreme heat warnings even closer to the East Coast. Now let's talk about what we're not seeing. A lot of rain over the next few days. With the high pressure overhead, that sinking motion of air, it suppresses storm activity. Think about anything you've ever been taught about a thunderstorm, whether it's here on Weather Impact Plus or Stream, whether you love Weather IQ, or maybe you've wanted to be a meteorologist since you saw a thunderstorm when you were 7 years old. You know that storms need to be able to grow in order to develop. That's why cumulonimbus clouds are tall and towering. Well, when high pressure is nearby, oftentimes the sinking motion of air suppresses storm activity. It doesn't always suppress all storm activity because, of course, it gets harder and harder to do that during summertime, but at least for the time being, based on its position, that's what it is doing, which means that we're not going to see a lot of rain and storms, at least today, tomorrow, and the first half of Wednesday. So with that sinking motion of air suppressing storms, we're also not getting the result of rain cooled air, which is very, very beneficial during these hot days. So I know it's a bummer sometimes when we have thunderstorms and you had plans to be outdoors, but it's also very beneficial if you're really, really hot and sweaty. I mean, come on, we've always been stuck right in those showers and loved it. It's kind of like jumping in a pool. All right, so tomorrow, hottest heat index value we're going to see this week, I think will be very close to that 105, if not just a hair below it on Wednesday. So the reason why we have that heat advisory in for both days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, we're kind of be on that slow decline back to a more typical pattern. Typically, we're in about the mid 90s this time of year, and the heat index is in the upper 90s. You've probably seen this 1,000 times at this point on social media, whether it's our page or one of our stories that our amazing reporters have done. But another thing to know is, of course, the difference between heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Everybody is different, but most of the time, lack of sweating, big throbbing headache is heat stroke, which is a medical emergency. So make sure that you're kind of making sure that you have all of these things in place so you know the difference. I had a friend actually one time who asked me basically why they needed to know this, and I kind of compared it to like the reason why we get CPR and AED training. Not every single person has to, but I did it before, doing babysitting and through Girl Scouts and things like that. Why not know the simple signs, right? So you can help people. I mean, you might be not the doctor that they asked for on the airplane, but at least you can help someone if you see them suffering from heat exhaustion or heat stroke. And for those who say that we should stop talking about the heat, I just want to remind you that heat-related fatalities are still the #1 weather-related killer in the United States. We haven't gotten 2024 data yet, but data from the CDC has over 2,300 people dying in 2023 from heat-related illness of some sort. I will note that normally the data from the CDC is different from the National Weather Service data, mostly because the CDC takes into effect things like direct heat stroke, like Jeb is outside and it's 125 degrees. Jeb, I always use you as an example. I'm sorry about that. But, and potentially dies from heat stroke versus someone who had maybe a cardiovascular event, like a heart attack or something, and they can tie it back to the fact that they didn't have air conditioning at their home. And because of not being able to cool off, that led to a higher risk for cardiovascular issues and eventually led to their death. So I just want to point that out just for full transparency there. But again, 2,300 plus, and that was a significant increase from 2004 when the number was only about 300. 2,000 more people in 2023 than 20 years before that. Of course, the impacts we know are going to be highest again tomorrow and again on Wednesday. Still expecting some major to extreme impacts as well on Thursday. But again, every single day we get past that, we'll see lower and lower heat index values. So 7-day forecast, we know again, heat and humidity is going to be very high the next few days, feeling like 100 degrees plus tomorrow because the air temperature is near 100, 105 if not hotter. Of course, the upper 90s 80s still on Wednesday. That will be the first day I think we could creep in a few isolated showers or thunderstorms in the afternoon and evening. Our amazing weather intern Lily and I were looking at some model data earlier, and it did look like we could get even a little bit of a sea breeze influence. So, Jeb, we could be talking about a sea breeze again on Wednesday. Latter half of the work week, we'll eventually see temperatures a little bit more normal for this time of year. Upper 80s, lower 90s in a more typical summer-like pattern. But yes, that will also come, of course, with the return of a few isolated showers and thunderstorms. But especially after a big, long stretch of heat, we are typically very, very thankful for that. Now, one of our other amazing meteorologists, Becca Birdsall, did an amazing story for us earlier, talking a little bit about 100 degrees in the Charlotte area. I know I mentioned this, I think, last week and over the weekend. Brad's been talking about it as well. But 100 degrees is actually extremely, extremely rare here in not only the Carolinas in general, but the Charlotte area. It's only happened about 24 times since 2000. Last time it happened was 2004, or 2024, that is, in Charlotte. Before that, it was 2022. But before that, and I was there for these last two, 2022 and 2024. It hadn't been since 2015. So again, it's pretty rare, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about that right now.
Summer just cranked the thermostat to broil. A major heat wave is scorching the Carolinas, and Charlotte is on track to hit 100 degrees this week for the first time since last July. Now, that's not your average heat. In fact, 100-degree days don't happen every year in the Queen City. Since records began, Charlotte has only hit triple digits in 45 summers. That's 31% of summers hitting 100 degrees plus. The average date we get there in those summers is July 11th, but the earliest Charlotte ever hit 100 was June 3rd of 1895. So if we reach the century mark this early, we're ahead of the summer curve by almost 3 weeks. Charlotte's longest heat streak of 100 degrees plus days was 5 in a row back in July 1986. But we've had multiple 3- and 4-day runs at or above 100, including as recently as 2015 and 2012. If we include 95-degree plus days, things get even hotter. The longest streak was 18 days, also in July of 1986. And even the mountains are feeling the heat. Up in Boone, where summer usually feels like spring, today's forecast called for a high of 88 degrees, which would tie the record of 88 set in 1998. The normal is 77. Boone's all-time high is 93 degrees back in 2005. Fun fact, Boone has only hit 90 degrees in 6 summers since 1980, and only 15 summers have even reached 88 degrees or higher. That's basically 1 in 3. So if it feels like your mountain escape isn't offering much relief, it's not your imagination. From the Weather Impact Team, I'm meteorologist Becca Birdsall.
And of course, Becca was just talking about the temperature in Boone. I'm looking at the observed weather data for today, and it looks like they did get to 87. We'll have to wait for the official, but I mean, if they got to 88 again, that would be a match to the record high temperature for today. Today was 98 in Charlotte, so let's say for the sake of this conversation it was 87 in Boone. Normally the temperature up in the mountains is about 20 degrees, if not sometimes cooler than where we are in Charlotte, which is one of the reasons why it's a big getaway for many folks who are trying to get a break from the heat and humidity. But you know, once that difference gets smaller and smaller, of course, less likely that people want to travel all the way up there. Although we will remind folks that if you are trying to spend those amazing tourism dollars, you should definitely do it for our friends up in the mountains, of course, and over toward the Asheville area, especially places that still need it as they still recover from Helene. Again, we also always suggest double checking to make sure things are open, etc., before you're going there, but that would be very, very beneficial for them. So, of course, as we continue to talk about temperatures this time of the year, I would like to do a little bit of a throwback. It's not that far, but last year, our awesome digital producer, James, and I got to go to the National Weather Service in Greenville, Spartanburg, because as all weather IQs, normally a lot of them start because you guys have questions about a weather question, a climate question, or maybe what I like to sometimes call my version of hashtag weather myth busting. And this question was temperatures taken in the shade versus the sun. How are they taken in the shade? How does that impact maybe what the result is? Things like that. So we went to the ASOS, which is, again, the temperature gauge, which you'll see in the story that's about to happen. The ASOS data site at the National Weather Service in Greenville, Spartanburg, which is at GSP Airport. And we talked with them and did a little learning of our own as to why it's taken that way and some comparison values so you can see what a significant difference the sun makes. There is some misinformation surrounding temperature readings. Temperature is not measured in the shade. Well, not technically. Let's raise your weather IQ. In Charlotte, our measurement comes from the airport by an ASOS unit. This stands for Automated Surface Observing System. This system is what takes the temperature readings. It pulls in the surrounding air inside using a fan. There's a probe inside that takes those temperature readings.
Measured in the full sun, but shielded from radiation.
The temperature portion of the ASOS is shielded in a well-ventilated area with direct sunlight.
You're probably going to get too wild of a swing having exposed probes to radiation throughout the day.
Chris Horn, the observing program leader at the National Weather Service in Greenville-Spartanburg, says having a standard for how they measure temperature gives everyone the same starting point.
It's supposed to be about 5 feet above ground level, or you want to keep it out of a drainage ditch. You want to make sure it's far enough from any kind of artificial surface, artificial heat source, such as a parking lot. And in the airport, it has to be far enough away from the runway or a taxiway.
This also allows other factors to be taken out of the equation, such as humidity and solar radiation. So to give you some perspective, we're going to take the temperatures in 2 different places. Right now, the blacktop in the shade is about 56, 57 degrees. However, in the direct sunlight, due to all that solar radiation, it's about 105, 106 degrees. For WCNC Charlotte, I'm meteorologist Brittany Van Voorhees. Okay, you guys, that was actually wild because I remember being outside with our digital producer, James, and the temperature outside that day was about 85. And in the shade, right by where we pull our cars into the WCNC Charlotte parking lot by our gate, it was 55. But in the sun, it was over 105 degrees. And I think that's important it's important for many reasons, but 2 big reasons. One, this time of year, we're of course always talking about protecting our pets, especially when they're going on walks. There's typically what we call the 7-second rule, which is if you can't flip your hand, and it's the back of your hand, not your palm, because this skin is usually a little bit tougher, but the back of your hand, if you can't place it on whatever that pavement is, whether it's concrete, grass, etc., for at least 7 seconds. If it's too hot for you, it's too hot for them. It's not even just about your pets responding to this, so please don't wait for them to, wince or things like that. The blistering on the bottom of their feet is something that you would have to not only go to the vet for, but nobody wants to deal with their pet, panting and being uncomfortable and potentially being hurt by that. If we do pull up Weather 1, once again, I did pop up, Jeb, just for reference again, that protecting your dog's feet on hot surfaces. Again, the 7-second rule, you're placing your hand on the surface for 7 seconds. But when you have an air temperature of about 78, the concrete can be 95 and asphalt can be 114. So it's not just because it's in the 90s. 85 can eventually feel like 105, if not 130, and the air temperature can be 93 and eventually 125, 140. So again, for perspective here, today was 98. So on asphalt, 140 if not higher. I know some of the stories that we were running earlier in the day, we're talking with vets and they always suggested, trying to do earlier in the morning if possible, later at night if possible, once the sun has either gone down or it hasn't gone up yet, or just trying to find those opportunities to get to shady spots. So again, be mindful of that. I have a lot of friends, especially if you're in apartments, that have some of that fake grass where they're able to take their pet out just in case it's dangerous heat or situation like what we had this week. And so that's always a good reminder, especially this time of year. I do want to also mention something else that related back to the story about the ASOS unit at National Weather Service in Greenville-Spartanburg. One of the biggest questions, I don't even want to say questions, maybe one of the biggest statements, and I know Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich gets this as well because we've discussed it in length because, again, I wasn't, but also he wasn't alive during this time period. But keep in mind that Charlotte has had record keeping since about 1878. So the first year we have full data is 1879. So that's a long time. We're actually really, really lucky to have that much data that we have. But the caveat here is that we get a lot of questions, especially when we talk about heat and humidity, of people, I wouldn't say accusing us, but people commenting on the fact that the data sensor used to not be at Charlotte Douglas, and it used to actually be in Uptown Charlotte back in the day, so back 1930s and earlier. And so the reason why I bring this up is that people will say to us, well, that's the reason why the temperature at Charlotte Douglas is going up. So like when we talk about record heat and things like that. But if you remember, the National Weather Service expert in the interview talks about the fact that there are FAA and, of course, NWS and ASOS regulations as to how far away that temperature sensor has to be from the runways. So it's nowhere close to the actual airport runway. So it's not getting any of the heat or anything like that of the airplanes taking off. And from being there myself, I can tell you that is the case, because I would have melted into a million pieces if that had been the case. But secondly, I will point out that because of the urban heat island effect and how there's so much concrete now in Uptown, and the fact that the city is continuing to grow, it would actually most likely be even hotter. So for example, today, let's say at 98, if the sensor was still where it was in Uptown, it probably would have read something that was 100 degrees plus. So there wasn't a sketchy movement of the temperature gauge back in the 1930s or anything like that to try to trick people into thinking that temperatures were warming. Again, it would be the opposite impact most likely. If it's still been in Uptown, it probably would be even hotter than the readings that we have today. And that's mostly because of, again, the urban heat island effect. So the reason why it was moved in the first place was to actually get it away from that effect and to have more what's the word I'm looking for? More realistic and reliable data, keeping, of course, over the past now almost 100 years since that was moved. So just wanted to throw that out there. Because again, I am definitely one of those people, and I know Brad as well. I mean, our whole weather team, but we rely on data. We are not trying to say anything sketchy or anything like that, or get you to believe something that is not true. It is just the true data, and that's what we're going to keep reporting. So with that being said, speaking of fact checking and truth and data, one of my best friends in the entire world, Megan Bragg, is going to verify, because she loves to do this, she loves to fact check, laws that have to do with the heat. And I know she was doing this last week too on some heat myths. So if you'd missed that one, check it out as well. But let's see what she did today, because I worked the night shift today, so I don't even think I saw the story. Let's hit it, Jeb.
According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, 33% of workers are exposed to the outdoors on a regular basis. The department's latest statistics show in 2023 there were 55 heat-related deaths on the job in the U.S. So we are looking at if there are any laws in place to protect these workers in the heat. Our sources for this: North and South Carolina law and OSHA. Right now in North and South Carolina, there are no occupational safety and health standards for heat. However, according to OSHA, there is a general duty clause. The clause states each employer should make sure the workplace is free from any recognized hazards that are likely to cause death or serious injury to their employees. Heat stress is one of those hazards. Employers could get a violation if they fail to keep the workplace hazard-free or they fail to correct the hazard. There are also suggestions and guidance for employers to avoid heat-related illnesses. There are programs to help employees and employers recognize the signs. In South Carolina, OSHA suggests employers provide water and shaded areas for employees and monitor for heat-related illnesses. With your Verify, I'm Megan Bragg.
I think that's an important thing to remember too. I think everybody is amazing, right? Everybody is amazing. We care about ourselves. We care about our friends and family members and things like that. But sometimes, even if it's just a thunderstorm, right? You forget that just because you didn't have a storm at your house doesn't mean your neighbor down the street didn't have a storm there. So we have to remember too that even if we're not directly impacted, there are so many people that are, whether they have to work outside or they're working in a situation that there's not working air conditioning, or they don't have it. They can't afford it. I know this was a big talker, especially post-COVID when there was so much going on, with the job search and things like that. There was a lot of stories that even we covered when I was working down in Florida, that it wasn't just talking about, inflation and things like that, or supply chain issues, that were related to COVID, but it was also resulting in people not being able to afford their air conditioning bill as well, because of the fact that they were having to spend it on other things. And so sometimes that can be a big issue as well when it comes to people having air conditioning. And on top of that, I'll even remind folks that especially as we get closer to the end of summer and into the early part of the school year starting back up, there's many places across the country, not here in the Carolinas, hopefully, I'm knocking on the table, but I guess it's more knocking on wood, that still don't have air conditioning because, they're not used to the heat, kind of lingering so far, into the end of summer and into the early part of the school year. So that's something, of course, we keep in mind as well. I'm going to go over just some of the other heat advisories, heat alerts that we have already in place, just to kind of remind people kind of back to what we were talking about before, because I just want to kind of bookend this with another quick forecast just to give you an update on what's happening this week, just in case you missed the top of this, or you're not able to go back and rewatch. So again, the big story this week is going to be the heat and the humidity. Temperatures are going to peak over the next few days in the upper 90s to near 100. Tomorrow, likely going to see an actual air temperature of 100 and a heat index of about 105 all the way up toward 107. Now, again, we don't normally see heat index value or high temperature values near 100 in the Charlotte area. It is relatively rare. Normally, because we're so humid outside and it takes a lot more energy to warm up humid air than it does dry air. Normally, we're upper 90s at best, but tomorrow is going to be one of the first times that we'll have that in quite some time. We just got the newest reading here as we approach 7 o'clock from the airport, and we are still sitting at a feels like temperature of 97 in Charlotte. The only word I can think about it is yuck. 102 still in Sherrod, 102 as well in Albemarle, 102 as well in Morganton. And again, all across the board, we're looking at upper 90s to lower 100s. Even the temperatures in the mountains still feeling like the 80s right now. Big story heading into Tuesday and Wednesday is going to be the fact that the heat index is going to be near, if not above, 105. Now, 105 is the threshold for heat advisory here in the Charlotte area. Now, there are a few spots that that's not necessarily the case. Again, if you remember our conversation we had last week about different National Weather Service offices, there are 3 counties that are technically under a different criteria, and that is Lancaster County, Chesterfield County. I just had a little brain spaz. I think it's Anson County. Let me double check. I don't want to say incorrect data. Bada bing, bada boom. Okay, no, it is just Lancaster and Chesterfield. Okay, you guys, we're back. The reason why I bring that up is because of different National Weather Service criteria. The National Weather Service in Columbia covers those 2 counties, which is one of the reasons why if you live in the panhandle of Lancaster County, maybe you live near Indian Land, that's a big town that we oftentimes have this issue with. When the storm kind of goes over the panhandle of Lancaster, sometimes it will be like a severe thunderstorm warning, and then it won't be again, and then it will be a severe thunderstorm warning again. That's just different National Weather Service offices having different criteria. They continuously work, of course, to communicate, which is amazing. But with that being said, if you are in Lancaster County or Chesterfield County, normally your criteria is 108 to 112 for a heat advisory. So just wanted to point that out for full transparency and full data. So again, heat advisory in effect Tuesday, Wednesday for the Charlotte area across the Piedmont. If you have friends or family members that live toward the Raleigh area, Fayetteville, all the way up, really up toward Norfolk into Richmond, Virginia, make sure that they are especially weather aware the next few days, as they're going to be looking at the extreme heat warning, which of course is even worse than that. I'll give you a last look here at our peak heat index forecast the next few days, and we'll see you tomorrow night right here, same time, same place.